Okay, good day to everybody here. Farmer Wade here for Billboard Battalion. We're coming to you today live from battalion headquarters in downtown Cayuga, which is in north central Victoria, Australia. We have today, we're continuing our coverage of the upcoming 2025 Australian election, which is going to be finalised on the 3rd of May 2025 here in Australia. And we've been interviewing quite a lot of the candidates, and we've also been interviewing quite a lot of the people who are involved in the political side, commentators and people who run podcasts and other kind of shows, and people who have information with regard to the election. So here we are today. I'm very, very pleased to welcome Dr. Chris Neal from Victoria. Chris is just outside of Melbourne at the minute, I believe. And Chris is a Senate candidate for Victoria for the People First Party. So today's we've had to record this one, so we'll put it up tonight at 7 o'clock. And because Chris wasn't available at 7 o'clock tonight, everything else we've done has been live. So we very much appreciate Chris's time and everything that he's doing. So we'll get right into it, and we'll find out what Chris is about, what he does for a job, why he's decided to stand for politics and so on. So welcome to Billboard Battalion, Chris, and how you going there, mate?
Yeah, thanks, Wade. Thanks for having me on. I'm going well. I'm just at the Organ Pipe National Park, just a stop off to talk to you. And the campaign's been hard work, but we're almost there. And so, yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
That's great, mate. I suppose what we could start off with is, and there's so much to talk about, what we could start off is, so what's your regular job? I know you're not exactly just doing a few bits and pieces. You got a pretty decent sort of a job there, and you might just explain a little bit about that, because I think that people would be very interested to know what you're setting aside or prepared to set aside to fight for Australia.
Oh, look, sure. Look, I'm a doctor. I've been a doctor since 2001, and so I've worked for decades in the health system, mainly in public hospitals and also in private practice, because I specialised in cardiology. So that's been my professional sort of focus, as well as some university work and academic sort of publishing, sciencey publishing stuff. And I guess that to understand where I went after that, it was in 2021 we formed the Australian Medical Professional Society, which is a large body of doctors and other medically aligned people, subject matter experts, that have been using our voice and our expertise to raise a profile of issues of medical ethics, issues, for instance, of vaccine mandates and other major issues facing Australia in terms of safety. And that has put me on this journey, I think. That's got me involved with going back and forth from Canberra and getting to know our great senators that stand up for truth, actually. And one of those is Gerard Rennick, and he was happy enough for me to be a Senate candidate for his party, People First. And that's where I'm at, and that's what I wholeheartedly believe in. As you know, you and I have sort of known each other for some years. And I guess my candidacy is about giving the the Victorian people, an opportunity to send a doctor to Parliament, to send a medical specialist to the Senate, to represent them in issues concerning everything, to make sure our health and our nation is put first.
Wow, that's huge. In so much as a number of things. So if you're in the health industry as a specialist, and you have that level of concern over, what's happened with regard to COVID and the injections and all the rest of it, and I know that you and a whole heap of your colleagues have been very involved in trying to make things correct and trying to make things right, and getting people the information that is actually the truth. To have somebody such as yourself to then look at a 180-degree change in career to step into the Australian Parliament, then I think that speaks volumes. And I'd just like to say, for a start, I've got to know you a bit over a few years, as you said, and I think it's fantastic that somebody such as yourself sees the need to have actual, honest, somebody who has the medical experience in the Senate, in the Australian Parliament, because what we see is a whole heap of people who are just, and I won't use the language that I think is appropriate, people who are making health policy and then enforcing health policy when they are absolutely, for a start, wouldn't know which end of a donkey's the back, wouldn't be able to tell the truth if they had to, wouldn't lie straight in bed, total disregard for the incredible damage and harm and lives that they've affected. So, I think it's great that we can look at somebody such as yourself and have a medical expert, an actual one, to stand up in Parliament and lead from the front and tell the truth, Chris. So,
yeah, well, I think the so much of what is sort of handed down as policy and what becomes policy is based on an argument from science or some technical facts of some kind, usually flawed, as you and I have discussed. But because it's technical, it's difficult for people to counteract. And I call that technocracy, actually. That's ruled by experts. The trouble is, if you have, sorry about the noise, I'm under the flight path here. If you have flawed science and you use it as if it is correct and undisputable, it's no longer scientifically flawed, it's scientific fraud.
absolutely.
And so we do need people, I think, at this stage of our federation, if we're going to fight back adequately, we do need people who are going to be technically proficient. And certainly when you look at the Senate, what our forefathers gave us was a system where we had a house of review, and the senator was able to make the government look bad just by cross-examining them, and that's exactly what we should be doing. And so not only, my candidacy is, as I said, about giving Victoria a chance to send a medical professional there. So a big part of what I'm doing this is so that we can hold, so that we can have accountability for the retrospective bad decision making that we all know about. But in addition, there's things going forward which we need protection from. And foremost would be the WHO issues. That's the Pandemic Accord and the IHR's International Health Regulations. Because the government, and particularly the bureaucracy, the public service, has simply waved this through. There's been no debate at any level in Parliament or in politics in general. So this will kick in. The IHRs will kick in on the 19th of July.
Yep.
And once all that's there, unless there's a major revocation of those agreements, we'll be actually vulnerable to being directly managed during a future pandemic by Geneva. And that is to say, by people who have no connection to Australia or accountability to Australians. So this really is probably one of the worst things that's on the horizon. And I can just say that I will use, every ounce of my strength and my voice and my ability to raise the profile of that issue and to make sure that we're protected.
And that is amazing and fantastic, Chris. And I talk to everybody who I interview about the international health regulations and the WHO. As I understand it, if they are implemented on the 19th of July this year, then you're stuck with that for 2 years. There's no getting out of it. You're bound for 2 years. First of all, is that the case as you see it?
I think that's essentially the case, but there's still ways in which I think you could push back, because after all, we are we're still a body. Australia is still a body politic which submits itself to the UN through various treaties. It would have to be a political solution and a political effort to really yank ourselves out of it. That's exactly what we should do, because we have to put Australia first. And there's no evidence that we can. There's no evidence, first of all, that Australia has learnt the lessons of its bad decisions in the pandemic, and though the decisions we made, we weren't under the WHO, were we? So there's no evidence that we've had a maturing, process of review. And secondly, there's no evidence that the World Health Organization really got it right. Quite the opposite. So that's my view on all those things. We can drill down on the particular aspects, if you like. I guess the WHO, the paperwork that has been, I guess, amended multiple times now regarding the international health regulations, at various points has sort of given the game away. They want to streamline the ability of the Director General of the WHO to call a pandemic, but also call for lockdowns, mask mandates, or whatever other things, including, really have to emphasize this, including censorship, massive censorship, misinformation, categorizing anything against a future narrative as misinformation, disinformation. But on the other hand, the kind of the documents of the WHO in this regard make it really clear they want even more rapid development of vaccines. They at one point used the language of 100-day vaccine, and what they call for is all the signatory countries to, sign on to making sure our legislation can deliver that. And here's where they give the game away: is they also say they want a compulsory vaccine injury compensation scheme with no fault in each country. Now, that to me says that they know darn well that you cannot develop a safe platform for vaccinating a population in 100 days any more than you could in the 300 or so days that it took to do the COVID-19 vaccines. And so they're saying, well, you must do it. Geneva could mandate vaccines for Australians under the conditions of the IHRs in the future. But then, hey, you'll get a mandatory, no-fault, compulsory compensation. But what kind of deal is that? So all of it's in the potential space, but that's the whole thing about laws. You shouldn't have laws which are so obviously going to result in harms if they're ever acted on.
Wow. So everything that you say is alarming and should be to any normal person with at least half a brain. I would put it to you that this system is being set up by people who have very, very bad intentions for the Australian people. And I think you're very, very gracious in your words. And I'll say this, but I'm not asking you to say this, that with the World Health Organization, combined with the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, their policies and strategies are to wipe out huge numbers of the world's population, and that these things that they're putting in place are designed to do exactly that. And they're designed to take full control of, under the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 stuff, designed to take full control of our military, of our government, our police, our legislators, the court system, all the transport, food production, under various things that they would claim are about health. It's given the people who hate us the weapons they need to destroy our country. So and I'm not asking you to say that at this point. Quite a number of other people are, but I say that a lot, as many other people do, and I hope that that's some of the things you keep in mind as to why you might be standing for this crucial job as a part in the Senate.
Well, I think you mentioned, hating the country, and I do think that there are lots of influences which cause a lot of people to hate who we are, and that's really sad. And we saw some of that play out on Anzac Day, didn't we? But I think that there's truth to words of a particular premier court in Western Australia. I think in the late 1970s, he said that within 20 years there'll be a socialist republic by stealth, and I think that you can see that's what the power players have wanted, and yes, it has been by stealth. I think to a large extent there are socialist principles that dominate us, and they're not in the best interest of the people, and the real vision for what Australia should be, for everything our forefathers fought for and worked for. And so we owe it to them and our children to put it right again, because it's a beautiful country, and we should be absolutely thriving in it, shouldn't we? I mean, how are we not considered among the most wealthy countries in the world? How are Australians not kind of accepting that as just a self-evident fact about who we are and the potential we have? Unfortunately, it's quite the opposite. Kids are coming out of school with a sense of hopelessness and doom and gloom, and not even knowing where to start, what to do. It's as if they feel they can't actually do anything. And that's not how it was for you and me, Wade. And we need to give them better opportunities than we had.
So, like the education system, Chris, is one of those massive things that we've seen take an incredible dive. We've seen kids now through the schools, in many cases, are turned into confused, back to front, inside out basket cases. They've got no clue about anything. They're just floating in the wind. And this is what one of the tactics of a communist or socialist regime is all about, is to cause division in communities, in social division, cause distractions. And, this is one of the major things that I continually talk about as well. Our universities, similarly, they've got some real serious issues, and we're seeing our kids now being terrified to death with this crap about climate change and all the rest of it. Climate change. I mean, the people who purport that stuff, some very serious consequences should rain down on them. This stupid looking kid they had from overseas there who fronted up to the UN, that was a complete and utter absolute setup. Those people were political pedophiles on that girl. They set her up, and then they exploited her to turn all the rest of the kids in the world into somebody who's terrified beyond belief about they're going to die from climate change. And therefore, how can they concentrate on developing into young adults and working out a future for themselves, having confidence in a career and a country, when they're dealing with all that stupid crap?
Well, look, you'll make your worst decisions when you're in the grip of fear. And if we look back over the decades, and it goes well before Greta Thunberg, but over the decades, Australia's worst decisions, I think some of our worst decisions, certainly concerning energy and the environment and water, have all been based on this completely false perception and fear. What is such a hot election issue now of the cost of energy, and the cost of living crisis that's been driven by it, was set in motion with the Renewable Energy Act in 2002, wasn't it? Under Howard, where where we really, yeah, and now we're just seeing the full outworking of all the costs that have been passed on to us on our energy bills and in our taxes, which are used to subsidise this. Then that's just to name one area. There's, yes, it's been so destructive, and yes, the climate narrative is far more narrative than science, in my opinion. And I would get into bat as a senator on that issue, because we do have great experts, and we need to communicate those opinions much more effectively and show up the fraud.
Absolutely so. And I mean, we see the likes of Fauci, Tony Fauci, who's out there and say, I am the science. Well, I think that the science world has taken a very big dive, and I think that scientists who used to be held in very high regard by the community are now seen as just liars and ideological hacks available for sale. So
Yeah, if that's true, and I hope that it is, as far as fraudulent science, then that would speak well of where we're at. If the electorate, if we the people are maturing through all of this to realise that a lot of this is just straight out deception, then that's a great thing and bodes well for our future. I'm very hopeful. You mentioned Fauci. I'm really hopeful that what we'll see coming through the Trump administration, which I've been watching, really carefully, because I want. I mean, I guess there's a golden opportunity for real exposure of some of the things I've stood for and risked my career for, things like vaccine safety, to name a few. But I'm very hopeful that there will be some better exposure in the months to come. I've got some objective reasons for thinking that. I don't like getting carried away by false hope, but I think there's some good reasons to believe that we will see the agenda being set from Trump and his cabinet, to do with Fauci, to do with the sort of synthetic biology programs behind the original Wuhan strain virus. And just yesterday, actually, I saw something from Pete Hegseth, who's the Secretary of Defense. I don't know if you saw it, but he gave an update on where it's at with compensating over 8,000 members of the US Armed Forces for their dismissal from the armed forces due to not complying with vaccine mandates. I don't know if you saw this. It was incredible. He actually said it was an experimental vaccine. He said, "We know it, you know it, it was experimental." And that is such a profound statement. And there are other things like that which I think give me some objective grounds for hope that the agenda being set there will be really good. But what I know is that we need to work hard to make sure we translate that agenda into our Australian context, because we have our own set of problems. We have our own entrenched interests in industry as well as bureaucracy. And that's really the thing, isn't it? It's it's the influence of industry and big money, in addition to bureaucracy, which is so often behaving like it's captured. So we've really got to we've got to outsmart them. But what I guess saying is that my hope is that I would be able to translate that agenda really effectively, if we see important things coming out and being exposed in the USA. I want to make sure we get the benefit of that here in Australia.
So it is interesting what's happening under Trump. And we've seen a lot of things with Robert F. Kennedy also now taking his position. It's interesting. We've got the DOD across in America, the Department of Defense, who are talking about compensation and reinstatement for soldiers and military, given that the Department of Defense were instrumental in the creation of this whole thing. And where he says this thing was experimental, I think he's given them a lot more credit than is due. And you're aware of the things that I say about that. So what I would like to see in the US is arrests. We've got all the big players. You got Daszak, you got Fauci, You've got even the Bidens, even the Obamas, all the people who are involved in this and have been for a long, long time in setting it up. They need to be arrested. We need to see the military arrest these people, and we need to see them stand trial in what I call military court-martials, where they are charged with capital offences. I think this is the only time we're going to get any confidence that we're really seeing some heavy-hitting stuff, because that's just what I think, Chris.
Yeah, I can relate. We've just got to keep doing what we can personally, because it is such a vast set of issues and problems, and yes, they are so serious, and I think that people have got to see justice done, don't they? They've got to see justice done actually to have confidence again in our governments and our institutions, even our healthcare. I'll say we can certainly say that trust in doctors has gone right down. They've measured it in America. It was in the 60s or 70s, and now it was down to 31% when measured last year. I don't know if that's been measured in Australia, but you can feel it, can't you? So and it's not a good thing that we can't trust. We need to regain trust, but trust, as everyone always says, and quite rightly, has to be earned. So we're in the process of it, and we've all got to do our part. My part is to speak the truth and hold true to facts and proper ethics, and not be afraid to do so, whether in Parliament or out of it.
Well, I think in Parliament, people have an enormous opportunity with the protections, that are provided under parliamentary privilege, to say just straight shooting what the deal is. And, I think that's been lacking for quite a long time. I find it, I sort of worked out a little while ago, a bit of a saying, and, years ago when I was a kid, and possibly you, people used to say, the least trusted in society are politicians, used car salesmen, and lawyers. And, now there's a different demographic that fits in there. And our medical profession is at the bottom. And they only follow the mainstream media in how much people dislike them and distrust them. And then once again, the politicians are in there as well. So, I think there's a lot of work to do to get things right, but we need to first of all deal with the crisis that is coming. What's your position on Australia withdrawing from the WHO, completely withdrawing and drawing a line in the sand, say not ever, never again, no way?
That would be our position, Wade, as a party. That's one of our official policies under health. But I guess if we were to form government, then that would be one thing. But obviously, let's be real. We're more likely to, if we get anything, we'll be part of a block of senators or lower house people in a crossbench having an influence on government. And so I would say that the key would be to raise the profile of the WHO pandemic accord and the IHRs in that circumstance, because if we can, yes, the WHO has earned enough. Enough. There's enough negative information and bad faith, I believe, shown by the WHO for me to say we should withdraw. But more realistically, where most people are not going to believe that's where we're at. So we would at least, at a minimum, try to raise the profile of how to protect Aussies from the pandemic accord and the worst outcomes of that. So yeah, I'm in agreement, but when we get there, we've got to work with what we've got.
So I'm of the opinion that if this accord or this IHR does take effect, I think we're in real trouble. We're in very, very serious trouble. And I think that we should all be pushing as hard as we can, as this is one of the number one priorities for any politician, any candidates, and for the community. So like as you're aware, I've been doing this for a while with Billboard Battalion, and our policy has always been go hard, tell the truth, tell it as it is. So what are your thoughts on, so far, a lot of us, many people have been talking about things, but not in a way, I think, that gives things a sense of absolute, desperate, serious urgency. So what do you think on the messaging and the way people should be talking now? Should we be still doing things that many people say, oh, look, you can't say too much because it's going to upset some people, and you don't want to create fear and you don't want to frighten people. I mean, that's exactly what the government did. They proved that that's how you get the job done. And if we do sort of half-baked, oh, look, it's not as bad as you think and it's okay, and what's your thoughts on how hard we should be going, Chris? And I mean across the board, not just political candidates, but across the board, and then by the politicians themselves, the ones who are already there right now, the ones who are there. So, as far as the lobby group, the community, and then the politicians.
Yeah, look, I think we have to be outspoken and authentic, and we have to be very serious about what's going on. But I think we need to balance that with solutions and a solutions focus, because if we're only talking about things that are going to make people afraid, then that doesn't hold out as much hope. So I think it all comes together. Everyone's got to do their part, but at people first, we're very committed to providing solutions, and that gives people confidence. I think that's why people first is gaining momentum and creating excitement and energizing people. And I hope and trust that'll play out in the ballot box. To get back to further develop my answer to your question, I think we've got to take a good hard look at what happens after this. It's going to be somewhat like the referendum on the no, yes or no for the yes or no vote last in 2023, and I think that we got a great surprise, didn't we? 60+% of Australians voting
Very pleasant
voting no,
surprise.
and I think that when we see the numbers, I'm absolutely of the hope that we'll see something to stir that optimism again. What I actually hope is that we have a combined vote of Liberal and Labor that's less than 60%. That would be so good, because that will show people that there is definitely a large space, a lot of room for another option, and that option should be very united for the people of Australia. It might require the merging of more freedom-minded parties, and that option should be, again, solutions-focused. It should be centrist. It should be populist. It should be tapping that kind of mistrust at the established power elite that have run the two-party system and the bureaucracy here, as those who are malaligned with Australia's interests, and show that it's really about the people versus that establishment and political power base. It's not left versus right. It's not country versus city, and we can't afford to be divided in any way. We can't afford it. It's a system which continually divides and conquers us. And we've seen that with the Anzac parade and stuff. But what I'm going to say is that the most disruptive thing we can do is unite. The system thinks that it can keep us broken up into groups, running away with our egos or our positions. The the thing we have to do, sorry about the noise, we have to unite. That's what's really the most disruptive thing we can do. And it's probably the thing which the two-party system least expects we will do. So there are a few of my answers. And I'm hoping we get a signal that things have at least moved in a better direction this time. Maybe not as, who knows whether it will be as far as we wanted it to. We're only 6 days away. But I think we've just got to take a good hard look at what all of that tells us and what it tells us about where we're at. And we've got to decide how to move forward, and we need to move forward together.
And I agree 100% with that. And you talk about solutions based. Well, I think one of the greatest solutions that we've got in the immediate time is to kill these IHR law agreements, pull out of the WHO, and you talk about the two-party thing, and they want to keep us divided. The two parties themselves, they create an illusion of division amongst themselves, but they're actually combined to fight against us. So when we look at solutions, any solution that we get that's big is going to need the people to know why.
Yeah.
It's going to have to give people an idea that they should lift their head and take notice of this one thing, because there's so many things going on in people's lives. And I think that we need to really, once we get the parliament sorted out, who's there after the 3rd of May, then we need to go to town on these politicians who are there and say, right, we don't want to hear any left and right crap. You red and blue, that's all BS. Get that out of the way. You need to understand, you people in Parliament, what this is about, and we need to be ready to push back hard on them, because they're the ones who make the law. They're the ones who sign up to this stuff, and that's a numbers game. So I very much agree with 100% what you're saying, but you've got to identify what is the problem and then go to town on that problem. So, I love what you're saying, Chris. I think it's great.
Yeah, look, and let's be honest, a lot of the problems that are facing Australians are just the crippling economy. And we have to have solutions for fixing that, because we're putting the burden of tax and cost of living on the people, the battlers, and we're letting the multinationals strip us of profits and assets without paying their fair share. So, that's why, although my background is medical, and I'm interested in a range of other topics, which I think will assist me, including economics. But I think what Gerard brings is just a really strong set of ideas from his expertise, understanding money and how it all works in Canberra. And we do have a selection of solutions to lower tax, reduce the burden, tax nationals properly, and ranging into other things like the way we handle our infrastructure, which is absolutely obscene and an incredible betrayal of everything our forefathers built for us. We need to own our infrastructure. And in addition, we need a way to do that. And so one of our policies is an infrastructure bank, which is worth looking into if you're interested. But we can actually buy it back. We can own the infrastructure even when it's been bought by offshore interests, which affects people in Victoria, affects people right across the country, especially if they're on the land. So yeah, we've got to provide hope, and I hope we can this time.
Well, I love that. That's brilliant. And I was very concerned when in Victoria back in the late 80s or early 90s when they said they're going to sell off the SEC. All that infrastructure should never ever be in private hands. It should be in the hands of a government, and a government that actually cares about the country. And I think that to get back our infrastructure, to buy back our stuff, first of all, we have to have a government and politicians that are actually committed to doing that and making our country better, and not a lot of the scumbags we've got there now they're the ones who created these problems, because they're acting not in the best interest of Australians, but for foreign powers and corporations and pressures, because they've been bought off or pressured or whatever the deal is.
Yeah.
Does Gerard have a strategy to actually to make this happen, Chris?
Look, if we get the balance of power, then we'll we may have opportunity to bargain for some of the selection of people first policies to be rolled out, and it's going to obviously the strategy is will obviously present itself. Which one, which part of the which part of the policy suite, but there are the point is we can do it, and there's a can-do attitude. We need to have that can-do attitude. Gerard's got that. We've got that. But our government has continually a no can-do attitude. And you see that in the essentially the asset stripping of Australia, the deindustrialization of Australia. In business, they call it managed decline. And that completely fits the bill of how Australia has been managed for decade upon decade, probably since the 80s, with the John Button's car plan, where he managed remarkably to get the automotive industry players and the unions to agree that it needed to be scaled down. But it's in what by 2010 to 2015 it was completely obliterated. But that's only one example. It's just a hallmark example. But so many things have been stripped from us. Our kids have a much reduced range of occupations, or things they can go into. We've become a less complex economy, and where it's better to be more complex. There's more options. There's more things you can do, and we've been stripped of so much of that. And it's the same sort of thing. To me, it's they've behaved like merchant bankers taking over a struggling corporation and just strip the assets out of it, rather than maintaining that vision which built this nation. You mentioned the SEC built by Sir John Monash. It's that nation-building vision we've got to recapture again. And we have to absolutely expel the current political class, put in much better people into Canberra. That's the way we'll do it.
Well, I think, you mentioned Sir John Monash, and, we've spoken before about the irrigation system here that we've got, who was designed by Monash, who was an engineer. One of the best irrigation systems in the world. Flood irrigation works by gravity. You don't have to pump anything. And they've systematically, in fact, the entire Murray-Darling Basin, from Queensland through New South Wales, through into Northern Victoria, through South Australia, right down to the mouth of the Murray. Their government policy under the fraud of climate change, they have destroyed so much. Family farms who were there for decades and decades, and sometimes over a century, have been wiped out. We've seen the unbundling of the water from land, and that water now is owned by foreign corporations, not our farmers, a lot of it. So we've seen a massive transfer of wealth from Australian private people. They've been sent broke by government policy. That's been the result. And then that has been able to be bought up by the multinational corporates. So, and which has caused us enormous trouble. Food security is now at risk. Ownership of Australia's land by Australians is now being wiped out. So does your party, the People First, have any kind of a strategy or an intention to try and fix that, Chris, or even hold the people to account who have wrecked it?
So to answer that, one of our policies is that infrastructure can't be owned by foreigners, and that would be,
Brilliant.
that's a very, a simple statement to make. It would be a complex thing to achieve, but it's one we must stand for. No other countries, particularly you look at Southeast Asian and Asian countries, that you can't own land, let alone infrastructure. We've very publicly we've sold off Darwin Port and other ports in Newcastle and so forth. They're very profitable, and we haven't even retained a sort of a 51% share, which would be, the minimum that you'd allow to sell if you're sensible. So there has to be a way to buy that back. I mentioned, I think before, that one of our policies is an infrastructure bank. Now, when we want to do a project in Australia, which by the way is less and less, our governments they don't seem to want to build dams and roads and rail as much as they should probably, but they borrow money offshore from offshore banks at interest, and so we're going into debt to create these things, and that's a huge, I guess, inhibition to do that. That can be handled by the raising of infrastructure bonds, and that can allow us to fund without going into debt, and to get infrastructure which we own as a asset on our ledger as a nation. And that's not new. That is not at all new. That's exactly how this nation was built. People like with Monash and others, everything that was built, there was that ethos that we could own it, and there was a public capital, public equity, and that's what it can be again. The Murray-Darling Basin is the biggest food bowl in Australia, but the Murray-Darling Basin water plan has been one of the most destructive things I'm aware of. Now, I'm a doctor and I'm aware of it, so it's not my area. I'm very aware of how destructive it is on the economy, on local economies in Victoria and New South Wales, and to the point of destroying families and even lives, because suicide, we've talked about that before, suicide among farmers. And I think I have heard of examples that are really tied to that in the Murray-Darling Basin. So my approach personally, although we don't have a specific party policy for it, would be to just to consult with the people of the area and actually possibly hold an independent inquiry to equip me to further prosecute policy as a senator if I'm elected.
That will be amazing, because I can tell you right now, Chris, the Murray-Darling Basin plan to date has been the biggest destructive, deliberate government policy in the rural sector. It was specifically designed to destroy things. It was based on fraud as a science. The so-called saving, I've got to save the Murray and the lower lakes and the Coorong in SA and so on. Well, that's all a total, just a fraud. There's a lot of other things that are important there. In fact, with their supposedly saving the Murray River, they're actually destroying it.
Yeah.
They're creating environmental disasters. So, and that's because they went after so much of our water that they don't know what to do with it, And you mentioned before about building new dams. I know that so many of the politicians here, I know Peter Walsh, who was the Victorian Water Minister for a while and leader of the Nationals, I think, at the time. Oh, no, we can't build more dams. There's nowhere to build them and you'll never fill them. This is what we're dealing with. We've got farmers, we've got communities who are trying to fight for things that are just common sense. They make sense. They're viable. They will make our country better. You mentioned before about, national projects. And we've constantly got these filthy scumbag politicians who are putting their foot on the throat and stopping it. And that's because they're being influenced and controlled by foreign interests. So, would you be in the business of calling for more national projects? Like our issue with the water, the dams that we do have, the government is running the water we do have, the precious water we need to grow food and keep farming viable. The politicians are running that water down the river and out into the Southern Ocean as fast as they possibly can drain it out. So, that needs to stop. The Murray-Darling Basin Plan needs to be scrapped, and we need to have new infrastructure to build more dams and get the thing back up and running exactly the same as John Monash did. So, I'm very, very happy to hear your policy about infrastructure. I think that is fantastic, and well done to you and Gerard and whoever else is on the same team there.
Look, I think as a general position, we're for the building of the nation, and that requires bold vision and a practical way forward. So I think we can say that, and then exactly what infrastructure, the experts are in the country. The experts on what should be done are throughout this country. I meet people like yourself who have really substantial expertise, and my job as a senator would be to listen and to advocate, but you can be sure my vision, because I want my kids to have a really, a life to the full here, is that we should be building this nation and make it better than it's ever been. So that's my position.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talk about something here, that you may or may not want to weigh into. That's entirely up to you. I think, if we look at a big part of the problem, we said trust in doctors is down. We've seen medical policy now that is the effects of our medical policy over the last 5 years has seen horrendous consequences. So you may or may not have an opinion, but for mine, and I'd ask this question. We see so many people in the medical profession who are there because they care about people. They want to save lives. They want to make people healthy again. People who just really, that's all they're about. They're about, looking after people who are sick and people who are crook. So some decisions have been made and actions taken that are completely diametrically opposed to that philosophy. Do you think that we're seeing a situation now where the medical thing is crashing and burning around us because politics is now coming in and influencing medical policies and medical actions? We're seeing that medicine is no longer just free to do what it is supposed to do. It is now being massively controlled and influenced by politicians for political objectives.
Yeah, look, the doctor-patient relationship should be based on a shared care partnership where the patient knows that the doctor is fully committed to the patient's interests without external influences. Certainly not the government or any other regulator or agency sitting in the consultation room, as it were. In addition, we know that the influence of corporate power is huge in all of what we've been talking about, probably, certainly in medicine. And in fact, that's one of the key things for doctors. Even according to the Australian Code, you've got to be aware of the effect of marketing from pharmaceutical companies on you, and yet I don't think that's anywhere near where that awareness needs to be. So we need to get back to that. I think there has been an influence on government in the doctor-patient relationship, which has distorted it, absolutely distorted it. And that's what I've been standing for, actually, for the last several years. How do we get back? That's a complicated question, but I think there is a culture of fear that affects doctors really adversely, and we can look at APRA. We do have a policy that we've developed on APRA. It has to do with breaking up APRA back into the state levels. There's been such dissatisfaction. Now, I'm optimistic here. There's been such dissatisfaction regarding APRA across medical and other health professions, including at previous inquiries, including Senate inquiries. So we know that we can tap that dissatisfaction. AMPS is having a conference on the misdeeds of APRA on the 3rd of May, which happens to be the election day. I won't be able to be there.
Yeah.
But
what are the
yeah,
chances?
we believe we can really fashion a new consensus of how to go forward. And there'll be a tremendous amount achieved at that conference. And beyond it, there'll be a written publication as well as how to strategically go forward. But from the point of view of people first, we believe that APRA needs to be dealt with for the first time in its 16-year history. It's very clear. The regulatory functions and the investigational functions of APRA probably need to be broken down and sent back to the states, and there probably have to be a whole lot more safeguards and boundaries imposed on APRA because they've functioned as if they don't really have any, and that's led to, again, that's led to is a culture of fear for doctors, and they can't function properly. We've already mentioned the worst decisions you make are those when you're under fear. Well, it's very clear to me and to many that doctors function in this, and it distorts the way they see things because they're not really free to make up their own mind, and therefore that affects everyone when they're wanting to see a doctor and get a completely unbiased opinion that they know is the actual opinion of the doctor that's in front of them. So lots to be done there. Huge set of issues, but we at least have a pathway forward.
Well, I think that's what the work you're doing in that is great. I, if it was personally, I would be calling for, and I mean, if you got into Parliament, I think I'd be calling immediately for criminal charges to be laid against APRA. I've, as you know, I've been very involved in this stuff for a long, long time. And when you have, for example, a dentist or a chiropractor who said, I'm not allowed to talk to you about anything to do with COVID. You go, what the hell? What is this? And this was so seriously the censorship and the fear that so many people were under in the medical profession. When you've got a bloke who just fixes your back up, who is too frightened to say, listen, eat healthy food and get plenty of exercise, that can only help. Someone who was too frightened to say that because they were under such shocking directions of a group of people who I don't even believe were even doctors, you've got big problems. You've got massive problems. And we saw quite a number of really brave doctors and nurses at the time said, we're not doing this. They called out what was happening. They said what was happening, and they refused to take the needles, and we had other doctors and nurses who wouldn't. And so, if we had all our doctors and nurses who have stood up and said, hell no, we're not taking part in this, could we have stopped that massive criminal action and the shocking deaths and everything that happened? Could we have stopped it if all our medical people had have actually acted with ethics and said, we're not doing this because we know how bad it is? Every marker. And so I'll just hear that question, and then I might just talk about the markers and the science of it, Chris.
Sure. Well, we know that we could have because the UK did it, and within the UK, it was the midwives, just one group who said, no, we will shut down the country and we won't deliver your babies if you mandate the vaccine. Obviously, some people would have already taken it by then, many people, I should say, including midwives, but they knew enough. They knew enough to know that you just can't mandate medical procedures of any kind. It's not ethical, and it's medical procedures of any kind. It's not ethical, and it's coercive, and it's discriminatory, and it threatens people's livelihoods. And so no UK worker was mandated, because if they couldn't mandate health, the NHS, they couldn't mandate anyone. So the answer is clearly we could have done it. We, it's a testament to their organisation that skills that they did it. We lacked them, but the health practitioners could have done it. I put it to you that the church could have done it pretty easily. All sorts of groups could have stood against mandates. Even if you didn't have a science background, you had basic ethics. And yet, again, I think it was fear and the effect of fear that explains why that didn't happen. And that's not good enough. Australia deserves better. But we've got to learn the lessons of recent history and be courageous, organised, and make sure we don't get put under mandates in the future, because they're incredibly destructive. I've seen so much destruction, not only vaccine injury, but moral injury, financial destruction, all sorts of just horrific things. For all of which the government should be picking up the tab, but they're awfully hard to hold accountable, and they hardly believe the word accountability exists.
Oh. Well, I mean, I just want to talk about the economic costs in a minute, but at what point do we draw a line in the sand and we say our doctors and our nurses, who are supposedly trained scientists in the area of medicine? Now, I'm a farmer, mate, and I do this stuff. As you know, I've got no university degrees, no anything, but I've got enough intelligence or integrity to say, hang on, we've all of a sudden, since a certain date when certain injections started, we've seen massive increases in medical disasters. At what point do our doctors and nurses go, okay, I'm a trained professional in medicine, we've got a problem, and say, no more, we're not doing this? What point should people expect that their doctors and nurses will actually take that attitude at some point?
I think I guess that the medical profession and other professions are complicated, and they're hierarchical, right? They're hierarchical, and so a doctor doesn't necessarily see him or herself as an expert or able to work out complicated science. Unfortunately, doctors also would typically assume that someone up the line had worked it all out, and they would certainly assume that if a regulator such as the TGA said that the vaccine was safe, then it must be safe. But the trouble, obviously, with that statement is that at the same time as the TGA publicly said safe and effective messaging to all and sundry on the media, that their actual paperwork in the provisional approval documentation that anyone could go and read said that they didn't have long-term safety data. So there's just a fundamental problem there. I think that says so much about how our government views us, that they can simply treat us as children and infants. In other words, saying in the fine print for anyone who wants to go and read it regarding the vaccines that were initially approved, we don't have long-term safety data, and safety studies are ongoing, and they will conclude in several years' time. And at the same time, the public messaging was safe and effective. And in other words, completely contradictory and disingenuous, and not even possible for both of those to be factual. And yet doctors doctors do not necessarily question. They don't necessarily, and they would typically assume that all that's been worked out, as I said, by people up the line, people more expert than they. On the other hand, too often we find that the expertise to crunch the numbers and to work things out is not actually there in the public service, or they don't want to tell us how they did something, or they want to keep hidden certain facts and figures, or pretend that we couldn't possibly work it out and not share, their sums and their maths with us. This thing's got to stop. And I've been involved in a certain capacity looking at our pharmacovigilance signals. That was what they promised that they'd use. They promised that they would keep a very close eye monitoring for safety signals and report them. And in reality, they didn't report the safety signals at all, as they were in fact in their own data. We did an independent analysis, and we found that there were 600 to 800 clear-cut diagnoses that were very powerfully, for which there were very powerful indicators that they were associated with the vaccines, one or other of them. And the official position was that there were only 11 diagnoses that were possibly associated with one or other vaccine. And there's no explanation as to why that is. Now, I do have a thought as to why that is. It's because it would have been a bold thing to do for Australia to say to the world, hey, we found other problems that you didn't find. And B, it would have been independent, and it would have been putting Australians first. And that's what we don't do. So we will not be, I like to, I try to imagine what this is like, but what I think it is that the decision makers in the TGA and the health department would say, look, we've got these signals. There are other things that the Americans and the Europeans aren't admitting to. We can't be the ones to blow the whistle that there's hundreds of other problems. I'm talking about in addition to myocarditis, pericarditis, various blood clots, low platelets, those sort of things, and transverse myelitis and Guillain-Barré syndrome. They were the sort of set of things which were officially recognised, but there were far, far more in the data, and you probably know there were far, far more in everyday life that were that were very evident. So I feel that it's this total defeated culture where we're just never going to do anything for ourselves or really on behalf of the Australian people. We're going to use the language of, we want to protect you, we want to keep you safe, but I think the culture of our public service at every level of government is just, it's not authentic, and they lack the courage and independence to stick up for us. So we're in a dire situation. There needs to be massive change, and I just hope it can start by sending better people to Canberra.
Well, I have a bit of a saying that, the excuses that a lot of these people use are, A, I was just following orders, B, it's the curriculum, or C, that's what we do in the medical thing. This is the rules that we run by. It has a word now, just escapes me. That's the protocols. That's it. Sorry, protocols. So
yeah, well, that's certainly and you'll know this. Anyone who's involved in your, I'm a doctor, you're a farmer. There's any number of different trades and professions, and a lot of people just follow the rules, and they don't necessarily have good problem-solving abilities when it comes to something totally unexpected. So I think I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that it's really amazing and terrific to see candidates such as you, Chris. We've got Gerard and Malcolm who are going again. They've done some terrific work. We've got a lot of new people. We've got people who are just from the rank and file of the Australian public who are now standing up. We're seeing that a lot, and I mean that is very, very encouraging. Makes me think that and you mentioned AMPS there before. The huge amount of work that AMPS has done has been just fantastic. The different movements and the different groups and professions that are actually starting to speak out now. I think we're resonating with the country. I think we're resonating with conversations that are unfolding now. I think that the WHO is now taking more of a central role at the dinner table, so to speak, or down the street or in the workplace. And people are starting to see now, they're loading up the mantra, we've seen a bit of an explosion in COVID cases and, go and get your vaccine and get this. Why don't you go to hell, actually? So stop telling us these lies. And as we know, a lot of the stuff early on with these numbers were just absolute lies, total garbage. So, it's really great to see people such as yourself and other just average Australians who are going, mate, we've got to step up here. Exactly what you talked about by the quality of the people we're sending to Canberra. So, we've got to have people who are not career politicians. We've got to have people who are not there being influenced by foreign dictatorial corporations or organisations and not have their snout in the trough or, getting paybacks somehow. As we're seeing with a lot of the politicians, they're getting junkets, they're getting presents and gifts. They're supposed to declare things and not. But, mate, the insider trading, the amount of money that they make working with corrupt organisations, this has to stop. This is a big part of our problem, Chris. So, I'm just so pleased to see that, you're heading towards Canberra. I just hope with everything we've got that people such as yourself and other, not so much freedom candidates, but honest and decent candidates, ones that actually care for our country, get into Parliament, because getting good people in there for a start is a big part of the thing. And then we need to change the running of the system, and we need to make accountability a priority. Get their snouts out of the trough, and get them back working for the Australian people, which they haven't done for a long time now. There's a handful of politicians that are really great, but the vast majority, like you mentioned before, the Labor Party and Liberals, we need to impress on them how dangerous this stuff that they are doing is. And we need to, they're signing up to, and we need to make the Australian people know how dangerous what they are signing up to, So, I think that what you're doing is fantastic. I've known you for a few years now, and I know the caliber of bloke that you are, and your party there, the People First Party. I was speaking to Michael O'Neill last night from the Heart Party. We've got a few more interviews to do before the election is actually finished. And I know there's a lot of people who might be pre-voting already. But, I'd just like to say a very big thanks, mate, for taking up the challenge and fighting for our country and fighting for Australia and bringing your level of expertise. Imagine if you were in Parliament making medical policy. I think that the country would be a hell of a lot safer, because the clowns and the traitors and the lowlifes who are making medical policy now are no good. They are dangerous, and they're not working in the best interest of our country. And I wish you every bit of luck and hope that we can to get in and start really sorting out some of these problems, Chris.
Thanks, Wade, and thanks for having me on, and thanks for everything you've been doing tirelessly, because I know you love this country so much.
We'll fight to the death for it. So, all right. Thanks very much, Chris, and good luck with it. Chris Neal is the Senate candidate for Victoria for Gerard Rennick's People First Party, and we wish you all the best, mate. Thanks very much for talking to us on Billboard Battalion, and we'll see you again in the winner's circle.